With us this morning is one of the most knowledgeable guys I know. He served in the Nixon administration, the Ford administration, the Reagan administration as a special advisor, and he also ran for presidential primaries in 92 and 1996. Good morning, Pat Buchanan. How are you this morning?
Doing fine, John. How are you?
I am fine, and I'm calling you to ask your advice. What the heck is going on in Washington, D.C., and get your opinion of where are we?
I think we've got a classic struggle here, John, between the incoming Trump presidency, which is really embattled in its first 5 months, and what might be called the deep state, which is the permanent government in Washington, D.C., the permanent bureaucracy, the folks who live here and work here and stay here through administrations. Between this group, which is very powerful, and its allies in the media, and the objective, it seems to me, is quite clear from 5 months of conflict. The deep state and its media allies seek to bring down Donald Trump and reverse the election returns of 2016. And I think that underlying everything is what's going on. And, of course, the daily battle are the revelations from inside the deep state and, frankly, leaks from the White House exploited by the media to embarrass and damage Donald Trump, President Trump, who has, I must admit, contributed himself to his problems.
Now, not too many people have heard that terminology. Is that a new terminology in Washington, or is it, or did we dig it up from the past? The deep state. I mean, does that mean both certain Democrats and certain Republicans are out to get President Trump?
The deep state, generally, John, it's a term that is used to describe basically foreign regimes, like people say in Egypt, after the Muslim Brotherhood won the election. The deep state moved and overthrew the regime after 1 year and replaced it with a military dictator. And they say the deep state in Turkey, for example, is behind Erdogan. So it's something of a metaphor and an analogy. But there's no doubt about it that the people who live and work in Washington, D.C., and who basically are the face of Washington, D.C., that the country sees on national television by and large, is hostile to the Trump presidency, deeply hostile. They look upon him as an alien, an outsider, a usurper, who got the election only by collusion with the Russians. And so they adhere to these ideological beliefs, and it's causing a great conflict in the city, unlike any I've seen since the final days of Watergate.
Well, I mean, Hitler once had the big lie. If you lie about something enough times, people start believing it.
Well, they say the larger the lie is, I think what Hitler was saying, if you a big lie, a huge lie, constantly repeated, and people will accept it. And of course, the Hitler lie was the fact that the German army had been stabbed in the back by traitors back home in Berlin in the First World War, in which he had fought. But I don't know that this is so much a big lie, if that applies, as does the conflict that you see around the world between regimes and elected officials and the unelected state, the permanent government. It's very powerful here in D.C., and one problem Trump has is he has not gotten control of the regime. I mean, the president has power to appoint, I think, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 officials and Schedule Cs, and Trump has made very few appointments, relatively speaking, and relatively few of these have been confirmed. He's only got a couple of people over at the State Department, for example, and so he doesn't have a great number of appointees, and he does not have all of his people in place, and the ones who have been left behind have sabotaged him. For example, one of the individuals over there at State, they were talking about how Trump wanted to put together a summit with Vladimir Putin and lift sanctions, a dramatic move on Russia, which he had promised to do in the campaign. And I saw him after folks left. They're laughing on television and celebrating the fact that the Trump initiative had been sabotaged. I mean, we elected Donald Trump, whether the country agrees or disagrees with it or not, chief magistrate, chief executive, president of the United States, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. and he's being frustrated by the government he has been chosen to lead.
And they're spending most of the time in the West Wing worrying about who's saying what versus getting the countries moving forward.
I think that's very true. I think you're pointing to one of the major drawbacks of what's been going on out of the White House, and frankly even out of the Oval Office, is this is a massive distraction from an agenda with which I think half the American people agreed at election time, and many more are willing to try. And that agenda is secure the borders, roll back immigration, stop the illegal immigration, remove people from our society who don't belong here, negotiate new trade deals that stop the export of American manufacturing and jobs, stay out of these foolish Middle East wars. I think by and large the American people kind of liked that agenda once Trump was elected, but this battle we've been engaged in has been a wholesale, massive distraction from what should be the real agenda of the American people.
And carrying this forward, I guess, is Senator Schumer, who I'm very, very disappointed on, because Senator Schumer is a lot smarter than he's acting lately. And Pelosi, well, Pelosi has her own problems with her own party.
I'll say. I agree with you. Chuck Schumer's a very smart fellow, and he worked hard and worked patiently to get where he is. But what he's done is basically he's made a clear-cut decision to be an obstructionist and to lead an obstructionist party, which stands in the way of everything that the president tries, which leaves the president with very small margins, very small in the Senate and somewhat small in the House. And so the president's got a problem to begin with there. As for Speaker Pelosi, I think she's the Democrats' problem now, John. I think she was a real factor in their losing that election, which they had won down there in Georgia, when they won the first runoff with 48% and then got 48% in the finals after spending more money than in any election in history. If I had to make a prediction, it would be that Nancy Pelosi will not be leading her forces into the off-year election of 2018. I don't think the Democratic Party would be wise to go behind her leadership when in probably more than half the districts of the country, she's a negative.
So you predict that Pelosi is going to be history pre-2018 elections?
If I had to predict, I would say that there would be some kind of effort at the beginning of the new year when the Democrats are going to be looking with anticipation to taking back the House to try to go forward with some fresher, younger, newer leadership. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is an historic figure. She's the first woman Speaker of the House. She's got a real record of accomplishment and achievement. But there's no doubt about it that her era is over. I think her time has passed. And if Democrats go into 2018 with her at the top, I mean, President Trump said, please, he wants her to stay in power. And I can understand why.
I would have been, as an American, I would have loved to have after Donald Trump became president on January 20th, both her and Schumer sit down with everybody and say, how do we move the country forward? And
yep, I think that's a feeling a lot of people have, after long bloody battles in both parties, the Democrat and Republican, and a very bitter election, if somehow the country could have come together. But it did not, John, in a lot of ways. You wonder if we're ever going to come together again, given the depth of the disagreements we have and the range of issues on which we disagree. It's not simply politics, but morality and culture and race and ethnicity and you name it, we disagree on it.
We have a minute left. And what would you like to tell America before we sign off?
I think if we don't cool off and if we don't find some way to bridge our differences, the America simply cannot lead in the world the way it should if we cannot unite and come together a little bit better than we have in the past 5 months.
Well, Pat Buchanan, whether people agree with you or don't agree with you, you're one of our country's statesmen, and thank you so much for being with us this Sunday morning.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure.